So each of these is a different component of what can be carried down the cable. Now, each of these has its own bandwidth requirements. When you are looking at this, you do not get all of this within the 18 gigabit domain.
Brent, I'm going to have you back up for a second. We were having more technical difficulties. I love this new system, I really do, I promise, but we're going to have to do some more playing around with it to ensure that we have it working the way that we need it to.
So were we not live?
We were not live. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Metro Home Theater Group Tech Tips. Thank you again for checking in with us.
Sorry we weren't on live on time.
Yep.
Did we not press a button?
No, it's apparently I'm still learning the new system, but we'll get it all figured out eventually. So, with that, welcome to another episode of Metro Home Theater Tech Tips.
I'm Brent.
I'm Adam.
And welcome aboard for our second opening of today's show.
Yes, so...
It's like Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, right? So, with this here, we are talking today about...
Whoa. Stop before you get into it. Like, subscribe.
Like, subscribe, share, hit that bell notification, all that kind of good stuff.
We're doing
good
great.
news for you is that we are now up to... there you go. We are now up to 273 subscribers. We have increased by 13 subscribers since last week.
973.
973, thank you. Thank you so very much for doing that. If you guys are watching live with our show today.
Oh.
Thank you.
Well, if you're going to do it wrong, do it wrong.
So, with that, thank you very much for checking in with us today as we learn our way and stumble our way through today's episode.
And you'd think it was our first one.
Yeah, well, there we go. So, with that said, we're going to go ahead and jump back into what we were talking about when we were not live, and now we'll go ahead and fill you in on what we are talking about. So, today's episode is brought to you by, first and foremost, the GA2, because today we are talking about part 2 of the TMDS information. So this is the last episode of a 6-part series about where we were deconstructing the HDMI cable. And today we're finally finishing it up with the last bit of TMDS and how it works and what you're going to be looking for. So today's episode is brought to you by the GA2. Brent, what's different about the GA2 than what the GA1 did?
Well, first off, I'm just marveling at your recovery.
I'm doing pretty well, right?
The GA1 is a phenomenal 24 gigabit per channel repeater. It will allow you to take an existing older passive cable, typically up to 15 meters, in most brands 17 with the MHX and up to 22 with the Velox passive, and turn it into a full 4K HDR cable and take you into the beginning of the HDMI 2.1 format at 24 gigabits because it's 4x6.
Right.
Now the GA2 takes that a little further down the line. This gives you 12 gigabits a channel, up to 9 meters in most cables, 10 meters in the Velox passive, and it will also step you between 24 and 48. And by the way, one of the things we'll discuss in today's shows is that most of the 48 gig TVs are still only 40.
Right.
Which will be later in today's show. So this is a very viable product to take you with an existing passive cable into your new domains.
Yes. So, now that we've got past that, we'll go ahead and talk about what we're talking about today. So today,
Are we
of
talking
course,
about what we're talking about?
We're talking about what we're talking about today. I mean, we're going to talk about it some more and talk about it then. With that said, today's episode is part 4.2. This is the final episode of our HDMI deconstruction. And we're going to be talking about a couple things. First off, we're going to be talking about the bandwidth of what we are currently using, and then what we're going to be using in HDMI 2.1. We're going to be talking about what does it look like when a TMDS channel fails. And we're also going to talk about how to fix that failure and how to prevent it from happening in the first place. Then, of course, we're going to talk about some tech news for you all that's happening in the industry. And on top of that, we're going to be telling you what we've learned recently on the tech support side, which is very, very interesting, very, very cool, and something that I was totally not expecting as to how it works with that. Brent, you're doing some arts and crafts today, aren't we?
Yes, we are, because
right.
we get to talk about TMDS. Somebody forgot to turn their phone off.
I guess I owe you a drink on that point. So with that, with the TMDS line we're going to be talking today, the first part that we're going to be talking about is the fact that TMDS bandwidth requirements in HDMI 2.0. So with HDMI 2.0, we are limited to 18 gigabits per second of bandwidth.
Why?
Well, for the most part, it's the chipset that's limiting us for what's capable of happening. And so when we look at the overall abilities of HDMI 2.0, we have certain abilities, just we may not be able to use all of them. What are you looking for, black?
The black, I had it.
You had it right
There it is.
So in HDMI 2.0, we have the ability to have 4K, 24 frames, 30 frames, 60 frames per second. We have 8-bit, 10-bit, and we do have 12-bit as well as an option in 2.0.
In Dolby Vision.
In Dolby Vision. We have 420, 422, and 444 for the color gamut. And then, of course, we have HDR, HDR10 Plus, and your Dolby Vision, which is your 12-bit.
Now, can you get all
point.
that at the same time?
No, you're funny. So, no, you cannot. And this is something that I've actually taken on as a personal pet project of mine that to learn and really understand and relay that information better. Because when it really comes down to it, the clients that you are going out to do the installations for, they are really trying to say, I want the best possible picture out there, and they're going to see 4K, 60 frames per second, 444, 12-bit, Dolby Vision, and they're going to want all of that at the same time. You're going to need to politely explain to them that no, they do not want, I'm sorry, they want that, however,
But they can't
unfortunately,
have
they
it.
will not have it. Now, that's in 2.0. Now, as we move
But
into...
wait. Why can you not
2.1.
have all of that inside of the HDMI 2.0 interface?
Well, what we are looking at
do you
is
have a slide
as
for
we
this?
go into, I do actually, when we go into the HDMI 2.0 world, we are stuck at, of course, 18 gigs. Now,
Why?
because each thing, well, we said that. We have...
It's 6 gigs per channel.
Exactly, 6 gigs per channel. Now, the parts that we're looking at for this here, what you should be seeing on your screen is a really fun graph. Now, I know it's a lot of information all at once, and I'm over here on the side. If you go over that way just a little bit, you'll be in the side there. There you go. So what you'll see inside that graph is actually kind of cool. There's a lot of information there. Go online and do a search on Google for just HDMI bandwidth chart, because this chart is actually a really great thing to have for that, because it will actually show you what you can do at certain bandwidth limits.
By the way, this is raw. This does not include HDR, HDR10, or Dolby Vision,
Correct.
or Atmos, or any of the other ancillary. This is just raw data.
Correct. So, with that said, what you will see is that when you go into the 4K, 60 frames per second at 8-bit, at 420, and HDR, you are going to be at your peak. You're going to be at your 18 gig.
Safety area.
Correct. Yeah, you're going to be at that point where you can't go
No,
any higher
10-bit.
than that. 10-bit. 10-bit. You can, because
Right, you can do
the HDR.
4K,
60,
60, 10-bit,
420.
420.
Yes. So that's going
HDR.
to get you at 18 gigs. Now, if you try to go,
1765.
yeah, if you try to go from 420 or up to Dolby Vision at that point, or 422 or 444.
Well, Dolby Vision is safe. Dolby Vision has a different compression ratio
Okay.
than HDR does. So you can still get Dolby Vision in this 18-bit.
Right.
The problem with Dolby Vision is not so much the bandwidth, is the fact that there are multiple profiles.
Right.
Now, think about this as automotive parts, carburetors.
Mm-hmm.
So you have Profile 3, which is a carburetor for a Ford, and Profile 5, which is carburetor for a Chevy.
Gotcha.
It is not very easy to just swap them back and forth between the cars.
Right.
That's the problem with Dolby Vision, where HDR and HDR10 Plus are actually truly universal standards,
Right.
and will work across all the platforms.
Gotcha.
Dolby Vision is a little pickier,
Yeah.
but it does allow you to compress down. And in theory, I defied somebody to actually prove to me it's better,
Yep.
but in theory, it's a better picture.
Yeah. So, with that, we just have to be aware of the fact that you are going to be limited, or you will have to limit whatever you're watching. So,
Now,
if
look,
the client
first off,
wants to go...
limit's not the word. You have to understand and express the legitimate values, and here's why.
Yeah.
Can you switch me the overhead again, young man,
Sure
since we
can.
started there?
Yeah.
As you're looking at this, each one of these circles represents part of the data. Your resolution, your refresh rate, 24, 30, 60, your color depth, 8, 10-bit, or 12 on Dolby Vision, what type of high dynamic range you're using, and 420, 422, and 444. Now, this is the most mystical of everything we talk about in HDMI. It is the one that causes the biggest issues, because every bit of the content out there available to the consumer is 420. Wow, you can't read that. Now, I can promise you that some of your customers have read AVS Forum or CNET or some of these other ones that tout 444 and the old Oppo player did that up conversion for you.
Right.
But here's what's happening. When you look at a quadrant of pixels, and that's how they're arranged, is in quadrants, you have 4 pixels that are together. Now, all of these pixels will get luminance, their own luminance control. That means how bright is that pixel. In 420, one of those pixels gets color or chrominance. That color is then shared to the other 3. This is done to minimize bandwidth requirements between one device and the next device in line. So this is 420 color. And this is exactly how Blu-ray players and streaming and broadcast is done. If you were to take 2 of those, give them color, and then copy sideways, that is called 422. Now the theory being that gives you a little bit more color information because you're breaking it up more defined. And as we get into higher color depths, this is a very nice feature. However, it starts increasing the bandwidth because now we have effectively doubled the number of pixels that get color. 444 means every single pixel gets its own color information. Now, if you wanted to do 4K, 60 frames per second, 444, 10-bit, and HDR, what is the bandwidth required for that?
24 gigabits per
Yes,
second.
it is. And what is the bandwidth of HDMI 2.0?
18.
And how does that math work?
You're down 6 gigs.
It doesn't.
Yep.
So that's why set all of your sources up to 420.
Yep.
That is the actual content that they can play. Now, there are a couple of games that are, in fact, in 444 and 60 frames per second.
Right.
Here's the thing. You can have one or the other.
Yeah.
You cannot currently have both. And even though the games are out there doing this, even the Xbox One X and the PlayStation 4, which are capable of resolving this, they cannot output it correctly over an HDMI 2.0 chipset.
Right.
Because the chipset plain and simply won't do it right. So don't. Set it to 420, 10-bit. We recommend 30 frames per second because that's actually what the content is.
Yeah, and again, like
With the
we
exception
always,
of
our
Billy
favorite,
Lynn's
Yep.
long halftime walk.
So, like Brent's saying at that point, right now, as it stands, as we are in HDMI 2.0, the content that's out there, other than, of course, the gaming and whatever else where they're trying to get 60 frames per second.
Specialty content from manufacturers.
Yes, which when you are playing on something like an Xbox or a PlayStation, in most cases, there's only like 1 or 2 games out there that are actually doing 60 frames per second. So in most cases, you'll have to be on a PC in order to actually get that 60 frames per second, or watching specific content that is 60 frames per second, which is right now something that's officially released is going to be Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk.
Yeah, officially. There is some content available on 4kmedia.org, which we do encourage you to download and put on a USB drive to have with you on your job sites. I'm not saying 4K 60, but have some media.
Yep.
Because it allows you to test. The site is this.
.4kmedia.org.
I did spell it correctly, right?
I believe so. I hope you did.
This is a good site. Download some of this content onto a flash drive. In fact, we encourage you to download a variety of different resolutions because, as we both know, just because 4K works,
Yep.
doesn't mean 1080 and 720 are going to work correctly.
Or even down to 480i if you
Well,
are.
yeah, that's a tough one.
Which that's another thing. But on those sites you can track down a 480i. My favorite's the Big Buck Bunny.
Yeah, which is in every resolution known to man.
Pretty much. You can go out there and download that in just about any resolution you need. I would download almost every resolution that they have available because in certain circumstances, some displays are not working with 480i.
A lot of displays are not, particularly projectors.
Right, and so that's a way for you to verify whether or not that's actually going to show whatever content the client's wanting to show. So,
now let's get into how HDMI 2.0 works.
okay.
And why they're seeing some problems. So if you'll get me back to the overhead shot, young man.
Sure will.
So this is an HDMI signal system. You have 4 high-speed channels that we discussed in last week's episode.
Yep.
Which are D0, D1, D2, and D3. And they'll be in a shielded format like this on your cable. Typically a 3-conductor. In most cases stranded. If it's a really good cable, it may be solid core at longer lengths to get that bandwidth.
Yep.
So you've got a red, a green, a blue, and a clock. Just like component in VGA.
Yeah.
Amazing. This is how digital started. HDMI up to this point has been red, green, blue, and clock. And if any one of those fails, let's say the red fails, you'll wind up with red sparkles. If the green fails, green sparkles. And if it's just a garbage cable and they're all kind of crappy, you'll get white snow or sparkles all over the place. And there is a fix for that. And what is the fix, young man?
Well,
Sparkles.
For sparkles, you're with sparkles, you're running into high-speed data loss.
Yes, you are.
And so, unless of course you have actual damage to the cable itself, if there's no physical damage to the cable itself, you can, of course, in most cases, you're running into high-speed data loss because of distance.
Yep.
And so at that point, you're going to use today's sponsor, which is the GA2 or the
GA1.
That way, you can, of course, get all that information out there to
Now,
the distance that you need.
I'm here to tell you, if you see nothing but snow, you got a cable problem.
Yeah.
And it's more than just distance, it's a cable problem.
Well, and what's interesting is that the snow that we see on an HDMI, what he's talking about, it doesn't look like your traditional snow back in the days of analog. It actually looks more like a digital. It's a digital snow, so it's gray,
like a bad pixel,
with just some really weird fluctuations on it, and just no picture whatsoever. You may get audio in that whenever that happens.
Because there's still a sync.
Yep, correct. But at that point, it's just not displaying the correct information. Which, honestly, it's probably the clock at that point that's been damaged.
No?
No?
Because if you're getting gray sparkles, you're still, all your video channels are bad. They're just all equally bad.
Gotcha. Okay.
When you get a single color, now you can also get weird color shifts, things like that, but that tends to be more EDID, which was episode 3. Or 2.
3.
3.
Yep.
So, when you're dealing with HDMI, remember, under current rules, there's 4 high-speed channels, red, green, and blue, all 6 gigs per channel. The 4th channel is clock. Yeah, this one. The clock is lower bandwidth, and a lot of manufacturers have cheated on this one because it didn't have to be as good a cable to pass that simple tick, tick,
Right.
tick, tick. This is where you're going to have problems going into the future.
Yes.
Because if this channel is not the same bandwidth as the other 3, you're not going to get a full 48 gigs, even on a shorter length cable. Now, would you like to explain the difference going into 2.1 and how it operates?
Yeah, so when we move into HDMI 2.1, you'll see that the biggest difference will be the increase in bandwidth requirements. So it's actually, well, and I say requirements, but for the increased abilities that we have with HDMI 2.1 being 8K, you still have the 24, 30, and 60 frames per second.
And 120.
And 120.
Depending on whether it's 4K or 8K.
Exactly. So as we go into 4K, or sorry, as we go into 2.1, you could get 4K 120. Now, of course, remember that as we go into that, if you go to a 4K 120, you are in effect doubling the amount of bandwidth that's required because there are 120 frames per second, which is double the amount of frames per second as 60 frames per second. So now if your you're double the bandwidth. Now if your content was 30 frames per second, but now we're jumping up to 120 frames per second, guess what? We are quadrupling the amount of data that's required.
And okay, if you wanted 8K,
yep,
60,
yes,
444,
yes,
10-bit, where would you be in bandwidth?
We are up to 64 gigs.
It's on your chart.
I was going to say, yeah, it's on the chart. Let's see if I can pull it up here real quick again. And there's the chart there. We'll hit this button over here so you all can see it. Ta-da! There you go. So on that there, you are looking at a difference of 8K, 60 frames per second, 444. 10-bit is going to be 80 gigabits per second, or if we go into 12-bit, it's 96 gigs per second. So now you'll notice that I'm also talking in gigabits per second, not gigabytes per second, because in gigabytes per second, that's what we see as like a byte. That's your gigabyte is going to be your recording. Now, a gigabyte is 8 times larger, or is 8 gigabits. So as we go into, as we're looking at this here, just be aware that it's 2 different, levels of data transmission. So Brent, what are we drawing? What are we writing?
I'm laying out what we have to decide what we want going into 2.1.
Oh, fun. So with that there, Brent, you were showing that before for the 4K, so now we're going to go ahead and jump into the 2.1. Sorry, you showed it on 2.0, now we're doing 2.1. So what do we have to work with?
Okay, can you give me the overhead?
I sure can. It does not like that. There you go.
Okay, so
Ta-da.
where before we had 4K, and we only had 24, 30, and 60.
Yep.
Now we have a lot more options. It's a lot like buying a car.
Right.
You got a budget. What features do you want?
Right.
So our budget is 48 gigabits. We're going to assume it's $48,000, which is, for you, an entry-level car, I know.
Sure.
But now we have to decide, do we want 4K or 8K? Good choice. Do we need 24 frames per second? Are we watching a movie? 30 or 60 for video broadcast? Are we gaming at 120? Do we want 8-bit, 10-bit, or 12-bit color? Do we want 420, 422, or 444? Or, in the really cool land, do we want the new Dynamic HDR? Can you tell me a little bit about Dynamic HDR, Adam?
So we need to start first off by talking about how HDR works.
Yes, we do.
So when we are talking about HDR, when the producers or the people that are actually setting up the lighting scheme or the color and everything else of what the picture is supposed to look like for a single frame, they give it an HDR level, right? So the HDR is a per scene.
Per frame.
Per frame. And so you get an HDR signal for one single frame.
It's a static for the whole frame.
Correct.
Whether it's this pixel, that pixel, or that pixel, it's the same HDR light level.
Right. So as it goes from frame to frame, it may get new information, maybe the same information, but every single frame has that information transmitted across.
For the whole frame.
For the whole frame. Now, as we get into
Dynamic
HDR, so DHDR, we are now getting into the ability for every single pixel to have its own HDR data. This is great because that means that when we go into the HDR movies that we are going to watch as this is coming out, that means that if you have a really light scene with also really dark scene inside the same image, they now have the ability to have the really light side be very bright and the very dark side be very dark, because it has all that HDR data for two different areas.
Now, I don't think we're going to see it at a per pixel level anytime soon, because
Sure.
just the time to build that and
Yeah,
production is going to be high. But as you mentioned, dark and light scenes together, they now have the ability to go in and they can darken this screen up
Yep.
while keeping our shirts moderate and our faces bright, where in the past they didn't.
Right.
They just had to treat it all as one static. So that also increases the bandwidth. So now, again, we have each one of these is a different component of the bandwidth.
As always, everybody, while we're going over all of this, any questions, comments, or ideas that you have about what we're talking about today, even if it has nothing to do with what we're talking about, we are glad to hear it. Go ahead and put it over in the chat. Or if you're watching this after the fact, put your comments and questions and everything else down in the comment section below. We do monitor that, as always. So without further ado, Brent, go ahead and continue on.
Okay, so basically what it amounts to is if any number goes up in any one of these squares, another number has to go down in another square.
Right.
You can't have everybody full on.
Right.
Every single one cannot be at 11.
Yes, correct.
Or plaid.
Everybody can't wear plaid?
No. The new Tesla plaid.
No, I'm sorry.
Dead men don't wear plaid.
Ah, there you go.
So you have to make a decision which of these feature sets. So if you're going to do gaming, for example, gaming, you're going to want to go 4K 120.
Okay.
Because your 8K 120 is just going to be too much for the monitor, for the processor.
Right.
So you give up a little bit of resolution. In gaming, you're probably not anything beyond 85 inches anyway.
Right.
So you're going to be hard-pressed to see the difference between 4K and 8K. So you go 4K, 120, and 422 for gaming.
Yep.
Gives you a little bit crisper color, high refresh rate, plenty of resolution, and it's probably going to be basic HDR because it's a game. And the ability for it to track and make those changes inside of a dynamic format are going to be very hard because games are dynamic in their build.
Sure.
They might be also using HLG. HLG, which is hybrid log gamma, is an on-the-fly HDR guess,
Yeah.
which is used in live broadcast.
Yep.
So if this number goes down, this number can go up. If this number goes up, pretty much they all have to go down.
Yeah, because at that point, as you were talking about with the the quadrant setup with that,
Yep.
you are now sending, instead of a single bit of information for 4 pixels, we're now sending 4 bits of information for for those
Right,
4
you're
pixels.
sending that color info for 3 colors to every single pixel.
Yep.
Not-
And then, of course, as we get into the dynamic HDR, we're now also sending
More luminance.
more luminance for each individual
Now,
pixel.
and think of HDR as basically when you look at brightness, luminance. Think of it as 64 grayscale, 256 actually,
right?
8-bit. So with HDR, you're going to a higher bit, for lack of a better comparison, 10, 12, maybe 16, because you now can get more defined brightness because the panels have better power supplies, better
Yep.
lighting.
Yep.
But they also have to have the control to tell them to go there.
Yes. So, now that we've kind of gone over the bandwidth requirements for HDMI 2.0, and now as we go into 2.1, let's talk about what does it look like when we see a TMDS failure.
Well, okay. We're going to talk about TMDS then.
Okay.
When you see a TMDS failure, because this is strictly a 2.0 thing, not a 2.1 thing.
Right.
Because 2.1 is not TMDS.
Okay.
It's a whole new system.
So let's talk about 2.0 then. So we'll talk about that, and then we'll talk
Okay.
about what we may see when those channels fail in 2.1. Okay? So, what do we see when one of those channels fails?
Well, we're back to what we were talking about earlier, sparkles.
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 Now, if a specific color sparkle comes up, that may tell us what channel is failing at that point.
And see, here's the thing. Failures are cumulative. Failures are rarely a single part of the system.
Right?
So let's say you've got a source. You've got an AVR. You don't need an overhead.
Nope. Okay. You just
An
want to show that
AVR.
off?
Yep.
You
An
just wanna
AVR.
Keep yourself in
And maybe
in
an
line?
extender. And then a display. Now, each and every one of these on their own meets the requirements. They're HDMI certified. Everybody's happy.
Okay.
But let's say you might be a little weak on the red channel on the source.
Yep.
But everything else is good, so you have no issues.
Now, it's weak. It's not failing. It's just
not failing,
weak.
it's just not as good.
Sure.
You know, it's just not quite,
Yeah.
but it's still working. It's still within the spec.
Yeah.
Now, let's say you're a little weak on the extender.
Okay.
Maybe your connection, maybe the build quality.
Just overall, maybe
Yeah.
we're failing there.
Right,
Okay.
so now we have the red a little weak here. We also have the red a little weak here.
A little weaker than it was
Now,
before.
the system is a little weaker. This in and of itself is still within spec,
Yes.
but it's on the low side of the spec.
Yep.
So now we take the weakness here and we add it to the weakness here, and it may be sufficient that by the time it gets here, you have the dropouts.
Right.
Everything in the system is certified.
Yes.
Everything in the system has been approved
Yes.
and tested.
Yes.
So everything is okay, it's just not good.
So everything's okay to itself. It's not okay necessarily
Together.
to everything together. Well, they do test, let's say, for instance, Sony, they're going to test their TVs with their own AVRs, with their own Blu-ray players.
hope.
And you would hope that anyways. And then at that point, but the problem is that when you're mixing things or you have different manufacturers or whatever,
Or different days of manufacturing.
that's true. The connection then at
Tuesday.
that point is not going to be, you have the Tuesday problem. By the time that you have everything connected and hooked up there, the cumulative errors by the time it gets from the source to the display has now failed. That's why if you were to bypass a specific product in line, so for instance for us we see it a lot whenever you have a source device going into a matrix, source
An
device
AVR.
going into an ABO or an audio breakout, then going into like a matrix, and then from there going into an extender,
Right.
and then finally going into a TV. We now have 5 different devices on that HDMI channel. Now,
Plus cables.
plus cables. Now, at that point, so let's say your ABO, then you hook it all up and everything is not really working. We're having dropouts, we're having whatever else it is. So you decide, it must be that ABO. It's the
It's the
cheapest
least
thing in the
expensive
entire
fish,
thing.
yeah.
Let's go ahead and see what that is. You take that out, plug it up, bypass it. Now everything's working perfectly fine. Now you lose the ability of having the audio breakout, but
And your
it is
obvious
working.
conclusion is
Something's
the ABO
wrong
is
with
bad.
the ABO. But
But it's not.
and it's not necessarily that it's not. It's just that, and this in most cases, it's not that one
And
device
it
that's
could
wrong.
be removing any of the devices
May do the
is
same
sufficient
thing.
to fix it.
Yeah.
It could be changing cables.
Yeah.
It could be a thermal issue.
Yep.
If you've got your satellite receiver DVR sitting right on top of your AVR,
Yep. Yep.
It could be that.
Because what does heat do to cables?
Cables and electronics, it affects it. It adds capacitive loading.
Right. Puts that resistance on there, adds capacitive
So
loading, makes it not
when
work.
you're looking at your system, the thing to remember, it works perfectly. I used the exact same gear as the last job. It worked perfect.
Yeah.
Well, here's the problem. When your source was made the last job, it may have been made by a different employee than it's being made by now.
Yeah.
Now it's still certified, it's still tested, quote unquote,
Yep.
and it's still a major brand.
Yep.
And it's the same thing for everything down the line. Just because it's all right doesn't mean it's all right.
Yes. So,
And it's not that anything's wrong. So there's certain things you have to have in your toolkit to help you.
So when we see a failure on a TMDS line, you're going to look for those sparkles because that's what we call the high-speed data loss. In fact, there was actually just a video that we released just a couple weeks ago that actually shows you an idea of what it looks like.
Oh, that was a great one too, by the way.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
What did you do to break that cable?
That was actually one of the cables that I have over here on my desk that I, on purpose, damaged
Yes.
the cable. Just bent it over and over and over again until finally it decided to stop working. Left it plugged into the TV, and then of course tested it from there. It's a great way to get that idea across to show you what it looks like. Go back and check that video out after today's episode. But when you look at failure, you're going to see that those sparkles come up on the screen. Now, you have a better idea of what's happening based on what type of sparkles. Now, if we have red, green, or blue, that means, of course, one of the channels is
and
failed.
the chances are the AIO is going to fix it, or not the AIO, the GA1.
The GA1's going to fix that. Now, if you are seeing white sparkles, that means that we're seeing more of a failure across the entire cable itself.
And the GA1 may help, but it may not, because if you're seeing that many sparkles, it's quite probably a physically damaged connection point at the terminal.
Correct. So less so the cable itself, and sometimes could just be the board or the HDMI port that is being plugged
In your
into.
hardware device.
Correct. So in that case, the GA1 or the GA2 may not be the thing to fix that solution.
A new
for
device.
Yeah, you may have to look at replacing something. Now, if you do see, of course, a failure where we were talking about before, where you have the gray screen and the snow across that gray screen, you've got systematic total failure on some kind of connection in there.
At that point, it's going to take a little bit of time, and don't think you're going to go in there in 5 minutes, have it fixed.
Right.
Because we're going to ask you a lot of questions in the tech call.
So, Brent, when we get into 2.1, and
Yes.
not very many people out there are actually using 2.1. And as always, everybody, if you have any questions or comments about what we're talking about today, even if it has nothing to do with what we are talking about today, we would love to hear it in the chat section. Let us know, are you using HDMI 2.1 panels or sources or anything else out there right now? And are you seeing problems? Let us know what those problems are so that we can go ahead and talk about it today. We may even come up with another episode where we're discussing just HDMI 2.1 problems.
Well, I think the only sources are the upcoming Xbox and PlayStation, I think, that's available to the consumer.
Available to the consumer. Now, we do have the new graphics cards for computers that are coming out that are going to have HDMI 2.1 capabilities. NVIDIA RTX series is coming out with those, and there's a couple others that, of course, are giving us HDMI 2.1 Now,
are they high refresh rates or just higher
they
resolutions?
are. They can go all the way up to
240?
They can go up even higher than 240. They're actually
Really?
doing 360 in some cases.
Wow.
And
So
now,
your resolution is going to have to drop
it's a
way
10
down.
Yes, you get to like a 1080p or a 1440, but at that level, you can go up to
If
a
you've
very
got
high
a,
refresh
if
rate.
you got a 32-inch or smaller monitor,
You might as well be
1080,
on that.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's going to look
man,
great.
Oh, wow.
It's insane.
Wow.
It really is. I've watched some previews of it, and of course, what I'm watching it on can't go that
Right,
high.
but just
the way that they're describing it, it looks amazing. So, now as we go into 2.1, what will a channel failure, what we would call a TMDS channel failure, look like in 2.1?
Well, 2.1 is entirely different in its world than where we've been. Because 2.1 does not treat the world as red, green, blue, and clock. 2.1 treats the world in an aggregate, meaning that each of the high-speed channels, please ignore my ability to keep things level. The height change was not intentional.
Imagine that those are straight across.
Yeah. So in each of the channels now, you have red, green, blue, and clock in every single channel, where before you had separate channels for red, green, blue, and clock.
So when we're looking at the old style, we had a channel for red, a channel for green, a channel for blue.
Right.
Now we are getting into the world now where everything is aggregated together to have red, green, and blue on all 4 channels,
Right.
not just on the 3 channels. Because now we have the clock also mixed in with the rest of it.
Yes. Now, why did we do that?
Well, for a couple of reasons. One, because we need more bandwidth, and adding in that 4th channel is going to give us that extra bandwidth.
Yes.
But also because now we have the ability to have a OK cable or an OK source or an OK display still show 8K video or
It's
a higher
perceived
bandwidth.
as 8K video.
Correct.
See, here's where it gets really interesting. Okay, let's go back to the overhead on
You
that
want
one.
the overhead? Okay.
Yep. Here's where it gets really interesting. And in fact, you know what? My drawing's going to work out perfect here.
Yeah.
Let's assume that this one is actually 12 gigs per channel.
Okay. All right. So that was 12 gigs on that channel on
This
D3.
one's 8.
Okay.
We're going to make this one actually 4. Even though it's that tall, we're going to
We're going to pretend, right?
We're going to
Yep.
4, and this one's 6.
Okay.
So I've got 12, 8, 4, and 6. What does
Yep.
that add up to?
12, 8, 4, and 6. Let's see, 4 and 6, you're going to have 10, and 8 is 18, and then 12 is going to be 28 and 30.
Okay.
Yep.
So what is the actual capability of 2.1?
48.
But it's still going to give me a great picture at 30. And then your customer's going to believe they're getting 4K or
Yeah.
8K because the metadata is getting through regardless.
Right. So,
It is not polling visually the way it did under 2.0.
right.
So the TV is still going to say 8K up in the corner.
Yep.
And even if you're only getting 4, 6, 8, and 12, because it's an aggregate again, it's not red, green, blue, each of these is sending all the colors and the clock. So now it can aggregate out. It's still going to show you that 8K little logo at the top of the screen.
Yep.
They're going to get a picture without pixels or sparkles.
Yep.
They're going to be happy. You're going to get paid, and you go home.
Yep. Now, here's the thing. What's happening when this is
happening
doing
is-
that? What happened was as the bandwidth abilities of whatever device or cable that's in place decreases on that one specific channel. So let's say our 4 gig channel, at that level, what's going to happen is that you may still get 8K. Oh,
Yeah, I just noticed that.
oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So
that's a dropout on the
this is perfect
source.
timing. Let's take a look at this, Brent. What's happening? Oh, here it goes. It came back.
Source went to sleep.
Well, no, the source did not go to sleep. It's actually heat. That
Oh,
that device
that
in
sitting
there,
on top of the-
It is very, very hot. If you all saw
Oh, that's
that,
from that light you had on
yes.
earlier.
So inside the rack over here, I have one of our media players actually doing this part here. That's actually perfect timing. That worked out really well. And the screen turned gray. Now, if you the eagle-eyed ones that were watching it would have seen that in this area here, there was actually a little section that was actually not gray. It was nice and black. But what you would have seen is actually where my name is here, you would see my name actually listed out in the gray. It was kind of like transposed through it. So what's happening is we are having HDMI failure on the source device that I have in the rack right now. So that's actually really perfect
Now,
timing to see
explain
that.
why we're having HDMI failure so they don't think we're complete idiots. Just mostly.
This is actually something that we're trying right now. We've noticed that on our video inside YouTube, it's getting a little dark, so we went ahead and put a little extra light back there. However, it turned out to be a very hot light inside the rack, which is not a place to put it. And so it actually heated up our source device, and our source device is not very happy right now. It's working, as we can tell right now.
It's a good thing it's not. It's a good thing it's not a dynamic picture.
Yeah, so at that point, it's still fairly static right now, and nothing's really happening a whole lot with it. But that's what you would see in a total HDMI failure. And this one is brought on by heat. Now, luckily, that piece is no longer, or the light's no longer turned on, so it's having an opportunity to cool down, but it's still, as it's cooling down, it's still going through throes of heat expansion and resistance and everything else going on with it. So that's what that looks like if you see a failure with that. So
One of them.
let's go back and let's continue to talk about HDMI 2.1.
Okay. So the biggest advantage that HDMI 2.1 gives you, the integrator, is you're going to get a picture even if the cable's not perfect.
Yeah.
Now, are you going to get the best picture you can get? No.
No.
And see, here's the thing. Everybody, we've all heard digital's digital. It either works or it doesn't work. It's all about thresholds. Each threshold step you go up is more data.
Yep.
The more data you have, the more complete the picture is.
Yep.
The more complete the picture is, the better the fidelity is, just like audio. So, you will get a picture if you have a less than perfect cable. And it's designed specifically for that purpose to allow retailers to not take TVs back when they sell less than quality product.
Yes. So, Brent, we are running out of time, so we have to wrap it up here pretty quickly. But to talk very quickly about what we were talking about before, we're gonna skip the news for today, and instead we're gonna tell you about what we found out. So, here's what we found out. First and foremost, this came from
a friend of ours.
From a friend of ours. This did not come from out in the field, so this isn't necessarily a tech call that we had, but we found out that some of the situations that we were running into where in certain cases we were not getting
with
correct
resolution and EDID settings.
Yep, resolution and EDID settings on the displays going through matrices, whether it be ours or somebody else's.
Or some AVRs.
Or some AVRs. What was happening is on the screen we may get a green overlay or a pink overlay or something that just doesn't look right. Now, here's what we found out. It is an EDID problem, but it actually is fixed by the display. So, this is very interesting. You know how you can go into your display?
This is one of those, wow.
Yeah, really, wow. Did they really do that? You can go into your display, and you can actually set the name of the
As
input.
a custom name.
As a custom name. Now,
Don't.
This is something, well, here's the thing. Do, because this is what happens. That custom name is not just for you. This is actually a custom name that the TV uses to know what profile.
With certain names.
Certain names.
For example, PC or computer.
Yep.
Literally puts in a different profile than DVD
Or
to
Blu-ray.
the display, or
Yes.
Blu-ray.
So if you are running into a problem and you have a PC connected to your system and you're running into a problem because the picture doesn't look right.
Overscan issues.
Overscan issues. Change the name of the input to PC or computer.
Now, this can be a bit of an issue going through a matrix.
Yes. Now, that's another thing because...
Some of the matrices
Yep.
allow you to do EDID adjustment.
Yes. Which
and
ours
be
does.
prepared for that.
Yes. Just be aware of that when you have the PC going into the matrix or something else. But in most cases, you're going to want to change the input name of your display to not PC or computer, but Blu-ray. Change the input of the TV to name it Blu-ray. Now, in most cases, you have like canned input names.
And those are actually the ones you want to use.
Yes, and so you want to pick out of those DVD or Blu-ray because it will actually ensure that it's not set to RGB, but instead YUV or YCV or something?
Right, YCV.
YCV.
YUV. Pick the best one of your system because you want to support all your sources, and it's easier to support down than it is to support up.
Yes. Yep. So that is the tech information for that. We're actually going to be doing an episode on that because
it was a shocker to us.
It really was, and we want to dive into that more and find out exactly what that entails. We're going to
try to force and fake and make things fail.
Yeah, and so we're going to try and make that work over here with this TV that we have back here. But we're going to do an episode on that very, very soon. So, Brent, now that we have gone into 50 minutes worth of showtime today, we need to go ahead and wrap it up. So, everybody, thank you for checking in with us today.
Please call us.
Please give us a call.
We're
our
happy
phone number.
to share more information.
Yes, of course. Our phone number, of course, you can reach us at 386-492-8584. There you can see it down at the bottom of the screen below. You can also call Brent at 866-839-9187, extension 2203. Brent, when are you available?
8 a.m. to 10 p.m., 7 days a week.
There you go.
And would like to give a special thank you to the new dealers and new subscribers that we have because of the videos.
Yes, thank you.
We appreciate you watching and signing up with us and giving us your money and buying stuff from us. Thank you.
Yeah. So with that said, if we helped out with some information for you today, a like would be very helpful to us.
What would be even better is call your salesman, order something, and say, "Hey, we saw your video."
There you go. Hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notification, give us a like, share this video out, let everybody know that we are still trying to shoot for 1,000 subscribers. We are now up to 973, and we're shooting for 1,000.
Before the video started.
Well, and we'll see what happens today. So, with that, thank you everybody for checking in with us today. As always,
I'll
put you on the spot.
Yeah. Turn off CEC.
Turn off CEC.
Do not cut your wires short.
I was going to say, you almost said do.
Do not cut your wires short.
Reboot early, reboot often, turn off CEC, and call tech support. Everybody, thank you again. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.